What if the creator of the legendary T-34 committed an act of professional betrayal, stole an entire secret project, and fled to the competition, leaving the state with a multi-million ruble debt and empty factory halls? That's exactly what the brilliant Alexander Morozov did, leaving his young successor, Leonid Kartsev, with an impossible task. Imagine this: you're 30 years old, and you're tasked with catching up to a living legend using only scraps of his ideas. Then, you're forced to ask the government to write off 16 million rubles, a fortune, because your own tank turned out to be too perfect. Yes, you heard that right. Its very own fantastic, ahead-of-its-time design was its death sentence. This is the story of the most paradoxical tank of the USSR, Object 140, a machine that was so revolutionary that mechanics needed dental mirrors just to repair it, was 30 years ahead of its time, yet its main enemy wasn't enemy shells, but a simple field breakdown, was buried by its own creator, who wrote a personal letter to the Central Committee with a shocking request: close my project. How did a tank assembled from ideas of the future lose a war to its own genius? Why was Moscow happy to write off millions, and why was the designer who admitted defeat not punished, but instead went on to create the legendary T-72? And is it true that this costly failure was actually the greatest success of the Soviet tank industry, the fruits of which we're still reaping today? This isn't just a story about steel, it's a story about the price of genius, the courage to admit failure, and how one spectacular defeat can grant a country tens of thousands of future victories. Watch till the end. The truth is more intricate than any myth.
Early 1950s. The Soviet Union, leaning on the formidable experience of the Great Patriotic War, had created one of the world's best medium tanks, the T-54. But in the quiet of the general staffs, alarming forecasts were already being heard. Potential adversaries weren't sleeping, developing new weapons, and the armor of the 54 could soon become vulnerable. A qualitative leap was needed, a machine of a completely new generation, born without looking back at past achievements. The man appointed to lead this breakthrough was a living legend, Alexander Alexandrovich Morozov. It was under his leadership that the 34, the symbol of victory, had been born. Now he was tasked with performing a second miracle at the Ural Tank Factory in Nizhny Tagil. The project, given the modest codename Object 140, from day one became a battlefield, not only with technological barriers, but with people. Morozov's authority, his unrestrained drive for revolutionary, not evolutionary solutions, met a deaf wall of misunderstanding and resistance from the factory management. Designers argued with production engineers. Military customers laid out their demands. The atmosphere in the design bureau grew tense. The brilliant creator, accustomed to winning, found himself trapped in bureaucratic delays and conservatism. This irresolvable conflict was bound to lead to an explosion, and it did. In 1952, Morozov committed an act akin to state treason in the world of defense projects. He gathered his loyal engineers and left Nizhny Tagil, taking with him to Kharkiv not just himself, but all the key ideas, all the developments for Object 140. The project seemed doomed. Its heart and brain had gone to the competition. But this dramatic betrayal wasn't the finale, merely the first act of an incredible story. Left behind in the empty design bureau were blueprints, young ambition, and a question: what can you build when the very soul of the concept has been taken from you.
The empty seat of the chief designer in Nizhny Tagil was like a vacancy for captain on a sinking ship. In March 1953, it was filled by 30-year-old Leonid Nikolaevich Kartsev. He wasn't handed a project, but a burden of incredible complexity. A half-baked idea, a growing rivalry between the two giants of tank manufacturing, and the task of catching up to Morozov himself, who was already at work in Kharkiv on his own Object 430, a twin machine built on stolen foundations. Kartsev found himself in the position of a clear underdog. The military leadership, the main armored directorate, was openly betting on the Kharkiv team and their living legend. The Euro factory was kept in the race only at the insistence of a minister. But the young engineer had more than just ambition. He had a sober mind. He understood that trying to copy Morozov with only scraps of his plans was a road to nowhere. He had one remaining powerful weapon: a team of talented, resentful, and revenge-driven like-mindeds like Deputy Valery Venediktov and lead engineer Ivan Bushnev. They burned with a desire to prove that Nizhny Tagil was capable of more than a shadow of the Kharkiv Design Bureau. It was this thirst to prove their superiority that pushed them to a radical decision. Instead of cautiously refining the legacy, they decided to surpass it, to leap over themselves. If Morozov envisioned a machine of the future, they would create a tank from the day after tomorrow. Their goal was not just a new tank, but an ideal. A weight of no more than 36 tons, yet phenomenal protection, mobility, and firepower. Every extra kilogram was declared an enemy to be fought with the most unconventional, even daring methods. But this pursuit of the ideal, beyond the limits of the possible, held a trap. Were they ready to pay the price that absolute technological perfection always demands? The fight for the ideal took the form of a ruthless hunt for every extra kilogram, and Kartsev's team resorted to the boldest rule-breaking. The first dogma to fall was that of straight side plates. They were replaced with bent sheets of complex variable profile. This wasn't just an aesthetic move. This shape allowed them to tuck a larger diameter turret inside the hull without widening it, and simultaneously to ditch heavy extra armor plates at the joints. However, this elegant engineering solution immediately spawned a production-scale problem. Only one factory in the entire USSR, the Zhinzhinsky plant, could roll the blanks for such sides. Mass production of the tank was already at this stage becoming finicky and dependent on a single link in a giant chain. But the designers didn't stop. They even challenged the running gear. Engineer Alexander Morozov proposed casting the road wheels from a lightweight aluminum alloy using a stamping method, something unheard of in domestic tank building. 6 pairs of such wheels per side instead of 5 provided incredible smoothness and better cross-country capability. The engine compartment cover was made of aluminum. It seemed every component of the machine was put through the filter of the question, can we make this even lighter? The pinnacle of this audacity was a decision that stunned even seasoned specialists. To radically reduce the hull height and make the tank as stealthy as possible on the battlefield, the powerful 12-cylinder V2 diesel was laid on its side. The engine was installed in the rear of the vehicle, transversely to its axis, at a 7-degree angle, offset to the left side. From a pure layout perspective, this was a triumph. The engine transmission compartment became incredibly compact, and the tank's silhouette acquired that very low-slung, slinking look the designers dreamed of. Combined with the innovative running gear and rack-mounted fuel tanks that doubled as ammunition stowage, Object 140 on paper looked like the absolute weapon of the future. But each such breakthrough came with a price.
The engine's unusual position required a complete redesign of the crankcase, crankshaft, lubrication, and cooling systems, essentially creating a new engine. The aluminum alloys for the fuel tanks were experimental. Their behavior in real service was a mystery. Every brilliant idea was like a crystal vase, perfect in static display, but fragile under strength testing. And then, in May 1957, after incredible efforts of the entire factory, the first prototype of Object 140 was ready. When it was rolled out into the light, even the skeptics froze. Low, streamlined, with a futuristic spherical turret, it looked like a visitor from another technological era. It was the visible embodiment of mind over matter. But soon it would become clear whether this beautiful thought could withstand the harsh test of reality, where friction, stress, and inevitable wear rule, not formulas.
The trials began with triumph. The tank, nicknamed the Flying Saucer for its shape, stunned everyone at the proving ground. Its six-wheel suspension on aluminum road wheels with powerful hydraulic shock absorbers soaked up bumps, providing unprecedented smoothness. The Vyuga Blizzard weapons stabilizer allowed for aimed fire at full speed over rough terrain, an unthinkable luxury for the time. In terms of firepower, protection, and dynamics, Object 140 looked like a true wonder weapon ahead of its era. But this brilliant facade began to crack, literally, from the first serious test runs. After 86 kilometers, the gearbox failed. Inspection revealed a shocking picture. The engine, laying to its side, suffered from a disrupted lubrication system. Oil simply wasn't reaching critical components. The cooling system also couldn't cope, requiring urgent and expensive redesign. The light aluminum road wheels, so delightful on the smooth proving ground, began to rapidly eat up their rubber rims. However, the true nightmare awaited not in the breakdowns, but in fixing them. When military inspectors and specialists from the Research Institute watched the repairs, they couldn't believe their eyes. To access a number of engine components squeezed into a metal cocoon, mechanics had to crawl under the tank and work through numerous hatches in the floor, lying on their backs in the mud. The procedure for connecting the control linkages required jeweler's precision and a dental mirror to see the hidden nodes. Even replacing injectors in the lower cylinder block turned into a multi-hour quest. The tank, created for combat, turned out to be completely unsuited for field maintenance. Its perfect layout had become an engineering trap. At the same time, Morozov's Kharkiv Object 430 was undergoing trials at the same proving ground. It was simpler, more conservative, lacking many of the revolutionary frills of the Tagil machine. But it had one decisive advantage: you could approach it with a wrench. The results of the comparative trials landed on Kartsev's desk as a clear and merciless verdict. His brainchild, into which they had poured their soul and years of labor, was losing, not in battle, but in the workshop. It was too perfect to be useful. Realizing this bitter truth was harder for the young designer than any technical failure. Now he faced a choice that could break his career: continue a hopeless struggle with the laws of physics and logistics, or commit an incredible, unprecedented act in Soviet practice. At night, the empty office of the chief designer in Nizhny Tagil was lit only by a desk lamp. Leonid Kartsev found no peace. The reports from the Kubinka proving ground lay before him not as dry technical documents, but as an indictment. Fuel consumption figures, accuracy of fire, cross-country capability data, all of it was brilliant, but they were crossed out by lines describing hours-long repair ordeals, the need to drive the tank onto a trestle to replace the simplest part, the use of mirrors for assembly. His mind's eye shifted from the office to a hypothetical future, to the mud of a training ground, the dust of a hot step, under fire. A young driver mechanic, not an ace engineer, trying to fix a sideways-mounted engine in field conditions. It was impossible, and this impossibility was baked into the very essence of his creation. In the pursuit of the perfect layout and minimal silhouette, they created a machine unfit for life. Kartsev faced a dilemma comparable to a surgeon's choice. He could continue treatment, pouring in new millions, years of work, endlessly reworking systems, trying to patch fundamental, congenital flaws of the design. Theoretically, the tank could be brought to an acceptable level, but at what cost? And would the country and the army give him that time, when a simpler, more maintainable Kharkiv competitor was already looming on the horizon? The other path required not engineering, but civic courage. He had to admit defeat, not tactical, but strategic. To admit that in striving to create the weapon of the future, they had crossed a line where perfection becomes the enemy of effectiveness. And he took that incredible step. His letter to the highest party and state authorities became an act of unprecedented honesty in the closed world of defense projects, where failures were usually blamed on subordinates, not the concept itself. I request the work on Object 140 be removed from the factory and the project closed. These words were tantamount to professional suicide. Kartsev asked for 16 million rubles, an astronomical sum, enough to build an entire neighborhood, to be written off. He prepared for repercussions, up to the most severe. The response from Moscow was a sobering cold shower. The request was granted quickly and without emotion. No anger, no investigation. The project was officially closed in the summer of 1958 by a decree, and the money was written off. Why did the bureaucrats, usually eager to find someone to blame, react so calmly? The reason was cynical calculation. The leadership in the main armored directorate in the capital had long settled on their favorite, Morozov's Kharkiv Object 430. The Ural project was needed only for formal competition. Kartsev's letter was a perfect gift for the officials. They not only got rid of an inconvenient, costly development, but also got a ready-made, signed by the chief designer justification for closing it. Kartsev's courageous act was used as a convenient tool in a big bureaucratic game. And so a specific combat machine went into the archives. But paradoxically, with its closure, the history of Object 140 didn't end. It transitioned into a new, much larger phase. It fell not as a barren seed, but a mighty oak whose fall fertilized the soil for a whole forest of new ideas. What shoots did this costly but not futile experiment yield?
It would seem that with the official closure in June 1958, Object 140 should have sunk into oblivion as a costly curiosity, a monument to engineering maximalism. But the opposite happened. The two remaining prototypes at Kubinka didn't become museum pieces, but unique treasure troves of ideas. The designers approached them with a practical, almost surgical grip. They began literally disassembling the failed machine for viable organs to transplant into new, more promising projects. Thus began the second, invisible, and much longer life of the tank Ghost. The legacy was colossal. The most obvious and tangible gift to the future was the running gear. The 6 large-diameter road wheels per side, first embodied in metal on the 140, ceased to be a daring hypothesis. They were tested, refined, optimal alloys and rubber were selected. And when, in the late 1960s, Nizhny Tagil conceived a fundamentally new main battle tank, the designers took this very proven scheme as the basis, without hesitation. Thus, the legendary T-72 was born, and later the T-90. Millions of tons of armored steel that have traversed the roads and off-roads of the entire planet roll on road wheels whose concept was painstakingly developed and honed on their unlucky predecessor. No less important was the intellectual contribution. The brilliant invention of engineers Nabutovsky, Semenenko, and Drobot, the rack-mounted fuel tanks, elegantly combining fuel cells and shell racks, didn't end up in the archives. Appreciating their efficiency, the system was immediately introduced on the serial T-55, and then became an integral feature of all subsequent domestic tanks. This idea of rationally using every cubic centimeter of the armored hull saved an unimaginable amount of resources and increased machine survivability. Even the automatic spent cartridge case ejector, which on Object 140 was perhaps the only unit that drew no criticism, got a ticket to life. It was improved and installed on the T-62, the world's first mass-produced tank with a powerful smoothbore gun, where the problem of fumes in the fighting compartment was particularly acute. Thus, Object 140 performed a unique trick. It lost the immediate race, but won triumphantly in the strategic long term. It became a giant, incredibly expensive, yet incredibly productive research platform. Every one of its mistakes, every revealed dead end saved subsequent projects years of work and millions of rubles. Every successful find was carefully extracted, polished, and integrated into the lineage of machines that defined the face of armored forces for half a century. Physically, the tank disappeared, but its technological DNA was replicated in thousands of serial machines worldwide. However, this story has a human dimension too. Everything that followed would have been impossible without the courageous decision of one man. What path did Leonid Kartsev choose for himself after surviving this bitter but necessary surrender? Did he become the industry's failure, or did this sacrifice open his path to true greatness? Leonid Kartsev's story after the closure of Object 140 is the brightest proof that true failure lies not in making a mistake, but in failing to learn from it. That bitter yet crystal-clear experience became a harsh school for the young designer, the foundation of his future greatness. From the ashes of an ambitious but unviable project, a new ironclad principle was born, which he followed for the rest of his days. A real tank isn't an engineering sculpture, it's an enduring soldier. Its duty is not to amaze on blueprints, but to survive, fight, and be repaired in the dust, mud, and chaos of real combat. Combat capability is more important than elegance. Maintainability is more important than compactness. This pragmatic commandment, paid for with 16 million rubles and years of intense labor, bore phenomenal fruit. Under the leadership of Kartsev, tempered by that failure, the Nizhny Tagil Design Bureau not only recovered, it made a leap that defined the face of world tank building for decades. They created the T-62, a revolutionary machine equipped with the then most powerful 115mm smoothbore gun and an improved case ejection system, the idea for which was born and tested on the ill-fated 140. And then came the star hour, the birth of the T-72, the benchmark of simplicity, reliability, and incredible effectiveness. It lacked the mad audacity of Object 140, but embodied all the hard-won wisdom, the proven six-wheel suspension, a rational and survivable layout, and manufacturability that allowed these tanks to be stamped out by the thousands. Kartsev's machines became the most mass-produced and exported main battle tank in history, and their deep modernizations remain a formidable force on battlefields to this day. Thus, Object 140 didn't vanish into oblivion.
it underwent a metamorphosis. Its physical shell, in the form of the sole surviving specimen, stands frozen in a museum as a monument to courage. But its soul, its technological legacy, continued to live on in tens of thousands of T-72s, T-90s, and their modifications, the rumble of whose tracks echoes from the Syrian deserts to the African savannas. It is present in every successful design decision that became an industry standard and in every dead end never taken again. Final note. Therefore, the story of Object 140 is by no means a tale of failure. It's a saga of rare professional courage and honesty with oneself and one's country. It's about the willingness to admit that your brilliant intellectual child, into which you poured a part of your soul, is incapable of real life, and crossing it out to begin writing a new, stronger story. Leonid Kartsev acted not as a defeated creator, but as a strategic thinking decades ahead. He sacrificed one dream tank to gift the world an entire dynasty of workhorse tanks. His decision became the highest act of design wisdom. Sometimes, to build a great future, you must have the willpower to properly bury your seemingly brilliant past.